Lessons for Survival is a book of, I would say, interconnected essays about social and environmental justice from the lens of motherhood, but it also has over 100 of my photographs in it. I would describe myself as an amateur photographer, and most of those pictures were taken with my iPhone. So it's not as though I was wandering the city with a camera. I was wandering the city with my iPhone, and
Of
you
course.
can take quite excellent pictures at this point. Like the technology is really good, and I'm a little bit nerdy about all the things you can do with your camera with your iPhone. Um, so like we were talking about, Jake, that my second book was really a work of travel writing and the result of like 10 years of getting to pretty much globetrot. Yeah, funded by my university's grant system. And then I had these kids, and I wasn't able to travel in the same way anymore. It was a bit like my wings were clipped. And so I started, I like to say, like, I turned my traveler's gaze, which is kind of similar to like a lover's gaze. Like you're more awake when you're in another nation. You know what I mean? Like you're more alert, you're more enchanted. I think you're more in love with the world because it looks different. And I had to like remember that feeling, but in my home place, which is New York City. And so uh, I started noticing a lot of public art in my neighborhood, like where I teach in Harlem and where I lived and was raising my kids in Washington Heights in Upper Manhattan. A lot of really interesting public art, like murals that commented on social issues that affected our life and commented on things that I was worried about for my kids. I have two Black sons, um, and also my students. So, for example, one of these series of murals are called the Know Your Rights murals, and they comment on police brutality. And I'd been asked to write an essay for this anthology called "The Fire This Time." It was edited by Jesmyn Ward, and that was, she was kind of calling back to James Baldwin's work, The Fire Next Time. She was asking writers, I think in the wake of Trayvon Martin's death, to write about race relations. I didn't really know. I was grateful for the invitation, but didn't really know how to structure what I wanted to say until I realized that these murals in my surround were offering me a kind of structure or a way in, that if I could photograph them and comment upon them, interview the people who had made them, and remark on the way they made me feel, and how they actually made me feel was kind of like taken care of and loved and seen, then I'd have my essay. And that was the first like time I hit upon that formula in a way that made me feel like safe. Maybe safe is the wrong word, but like it gave me a sense of permission and ease with writing about really big things in a way that felt like personal and possible, right? And then that kind of expanded outward to writing about the environment and the climate crisis, because also there were these really interesting public artworks in my surround commenting on that. So I could really like document them with my iPhone camera, interview the artists, talk with with the reader deliberately and personally about my own fears um and in a sense also like witnessing and documenting public art, which isn't going to last forever, especially when we're talking about murals. Like they don't exist forever. So I also felt kind of like a sense of responsibility to record and share some interesting artworks that wouldn't always be around. I got to talk to some of the artists directly and interview them about their approach. In one case with a woman called Marta Alicia Matarita, I got to like interview her as she was making a mural. And so it was cool to be able to see her with her spray paint cans at work. And in a couple cases with these murals, they're like, they're not just individual murals, they're part of a mural series. So like the one Marta Alicia was working on was a gray hawk, a bird. And although she had chosen the species of bird she wanted to paint, the larger project that she's part of as a muralist is this Audubon mural project. And um, so John James Audubon, like he lived in Washington Heights, he's buried there. And so there's this kind of like connection to the Audubon society. And so a lot of local business owners, as well as this gallerist who had a gallery in the Heights, decided they wanted to make a series of murals of North American birds that John James Audubon had depicted. But in particular, it's like a climate project because they wanted to paint birds that that are expected to be extinct by the year 2080 if we continue on our current trajectory owing to climate change, habitat loss, and so the birds you see, and there's over 100 of them, and I've documented all of them so far up in upper Manhattan, are expected to be extinct. Like they're these beautiful murals, and they're all part of this same project, and they're all in different styles because they're done by different artists, many artists like Marta Alicia, who are local to the community. But it's also kind of a sad, like it's a beautiful project, but it's also kind of a sad project. And then at the same time, I wanted to write about how those birds are endangered, but just like you alluded to, in those neighborhoods where gentrification is a real force to be reckoned with, like a lot of those people who've lived there for generations or who have deep kind of roots are being pushed out by forces of gentrification. In that sense, are kind of endangered too, at least in terms of like habitat. So I wanted to kind of write about both those things together. And then there's this other piece that's complicated about murals sometimes. Like sometimes mural projects like this, there's one in Miami. I'm trying to remember the name of that project. Sometimes they can be like the first sign of gentrification or a sign of greenwashing. Like sometimes, depending on who the developer is, who's giving money behind it, like it can signal to a certain like class of people they might be trying to invite in. Like it might be one of the first signs that a neighborhood is changing over. So some people I interviewed while writing about those murals had a different feeling about them than I did. Like I really think they're beautiful, wanted to capture their beauty. But other people who live in Harlem and Washington Heights are like, oh, this is a sign of these birds are kind of like they're similar to all the cafes that are coming in with their $8 lattes, right? Like maybe feel like a fishbowl full of white people on their laptops working in the daytime. Like it feels like a part of that change. So it's complicated. I think the final image is a picture of my kids. There are pictures of my kids, though I kind of tried to protect their identity. So in the final image of my kids, I think they're wearing masks because face masks because we were still in the pandemic. And one of them is on a skateboard. He's wearing a sweatshirt that has like a skull and crossbones on it, and he has a plastic snake like wrapped around his wrist. And the other one is leaning against the pole. It's like we're outside of a subway entrance. It's a very like New York City picture, but they're like no longer little kids. Whereas the very beginning of the book, like the dedication page, it's the two of them when they're really little and they're standing by one of these murals. In fact, the first mural that I photographed in Washington Heights. So I bookended the book with pictures of my kids. Like, oh yeah, and I'll just say like that first picture, one of my kids is wearing like a panda mask, just not because of, just because it was fun. Like you can't quite see his face. But I wanted to indicate growth, like because I was very interested, as I said in this book, kind of writing from the lens of parenthood, from the lens of somebody who's I think sensibly quite worried about bringing kids into a world of polycrisis and where like there's a lot that's threatening their safety. And I wanted to write about that, but from a place of love. And so Lessons for Survival, the title is a nod to that, is thinking through like, well, I don't really have lessons to give, but I'm seeking lessons. And I talk to a lot of people who I think are wiser than myself about survival, and tried to put down what they told me because it was solace for me to receive some wisdom. But yeah, the bookends of the book in terms of photography are images of my kids when they're really small, and then images of them when they're kind of this point of like growing independence. So yeah, not so little anymore.